Now to the analysis of Shields and Brooks. That's syndicated columnist Mark Shields and New York Times columnist David Brooks. Welcome, gentlemen. So we're just one day away, David, from the 100-day mark of the new administration. What are we thinking right now?
100 days is stupid, Mark. 99 days, much better. It's not a success, but I think what's striking, he's had the obvious failures, the healthcare and all the rest. I think what's striking and makes me remain curious about the next 4 years is the change. I mean, it's just rapid change. We've never seen a president change this much, from being a populist to being a corporatist, from being the Bannon Dark Knight to shifting to being pretty straight, at least people who are putting a process around him. And so I'd say there's been some improvement. He's never going to be a deep thinker. He's never going to have an overall strategy, but the level of flexibility is, to me, actually one of the more striking and maybe hopeful that he can learn from failure.
Some improvement, Mark?
Judy, there's an old formula in Washington. When someone changes and moves in your direction, politically and philosophically, that person has grown. When he moves in the other direction, of course, he's Benedict Arnold. He's a Judas Iscariot. He's a traitor. Donald Trump has one loyal constituency. To listen to David, and I think his point is right, he has changed. He has turned his back on that constituency. 3 out of 4 Americans approve of one thing Donald Trump has done, and that is forcing companies to keep jobs in the United States. I mean, that was the populist theme. That was something that no other president has won the White House on. He, under the pressure of the 100-day deadline, which he kept disdaining and then genuflecting before and feverishly pursuing, Donald Trump came up with a one-page tax plan that turned his back totally on the people who elected him. And his Secretary of the Treasury could not even tell you what a family of making $70,000 a year with 2 children, whether they would pay more or less in taxes. But you could tell you one thing, that Donald Trump's cabinet would pay, and Donald Trump, on that plan, would pay measurably less. It was a plan designed for the deserving rich.
So you're saying they did put out a plan, a one-page plan.
That's right.
But it doesn't tell us much more, David,
Well,
about what they really will do.
There are 2 things. First, which way is he moving? He's not moving toward people like me. I'm not part of the corporate elite, though.
No, I know that.
I'm flattered by the reference. But he's moving from a version of populism to a version of corporatism. And if there was a good version of populism where it would really help the people who voted for him, that would be great. That was not something he was going to be capable of doing. He got an ethnic populism, which was mostly an ugly version of populism. And second, by the way, there is no constituency for populism of the good sort in the United States Congress. So that was never going to happen. So he's moved towards something which does help his friends in big business. There's no question about that. I happen to think that's a less dangerous mode of change. It's more conventional anyway than being a populist. If he'd tried to be an American Le Pen, an American Putin, that was the truly dangerous thing. And that part he has rejected. So I think at least we've avoided a really ugly version of a White House, at least right now. The second thing about the tax plan, he's never going to be deep. He's never going to be substantive. He wants a tax plan right away. The Treasury Department has no time to actually put anything together. So they give him a page which they think will please him, which is right. It wasn't a tax plan. It was just 100 words off the top of their heads. And that's why I think he will leave little mark with his tax plan. That thing is sure to fail, at least in its present form. And so he just floats across the surface without really causing any change, just a lot of ruffle.
Whatever it is, Mark, I mean, David's point is that it's better than what it sounded like it was going to be during the campaign.
I don't know. I mean, he turned his back on the people elected. I mean, what Donald Trump did, what no Republican had done since Ronald Reagan, was to break through among blue-collar, white voters, working-class voters in this country, whom Democrats had kind of assumed were part of their constituency, had taken for granted, and who had paid the price of globalization, whose own fortunes had suffered, the shrinking of the middle class established once again this week by Pew in its research in this country. And Donald Trump said, I recognize you, I'm with you. And whatever else has happened, I mean, the great virtue of Donald Trump as a candidate was he says what he means. And it turns out he didn't mean what he said. And Judy, you cannot talk about Donald Trump without talking about the Republicans. And the tax the tax thing is one thing because it's just a piece of paper, but the health care thing is a failure, a total philosophical, political, and courageous failure of a political party as well as the president. I mean,
because they talked about it for so long.
they won 4 elections. They won 4 elections in a row for the Congress on it, Judy. And let's just get one thing straight. One thing straight. The Democrats passed a bill in 2010, and they had 179 witnesses appear before Congress. They had 78 separate hearings of Congress. They've had 230 amendments they considered. They accepted 121 of them. It was a 2-year ordeal, and these people have invested nothing. They can't even come up with a repeal bill. It is just now all they're trying to pass in the House is what's the legislative equivalent of a dead fish. They just want to get it out of them and across to the Senate.
Is that on the president, David, or is that on the Republicans in the Congress?
It's on both. The president came in with no plan, with no strategy, with no people. So he is just a guy with words and tweets. It's a bid on the Congress, but it's also just a bid on the party. There is no plan that could pass with all the Republican votes, because every time you get the Freedom Caucus, you lose the moderates. That is just the iron rule. And so if you wanted to do the kind of government I think Mark and I would probably both find some favor with, you would have come in, Trump would have said, I'm going to help my people. And I'm going to do first a big infrastructure spending bill, then maybe a payroll tax cut, and then moving things, some education things, just everything at that group. But to get something like that passed would have required breaking down the polarization of our politics and getting some Democrats and some Republicans, and that would have been great, but it would have required such legislative skill and experience that it was completely beyond the capacities of this White House.
What about, I mean, just the style of this president, Mark, the fact that he made just a offhand statement this week, tweeted, we're going to do away with NAFTA, I'm going to terminate it. And then within 24 hours, he was saying, well, I heard from the presidents of Mexico and Canada, the Prime Minister of Canada, and I'm going to negotiate it. And then we've been talking tonight about North Korea, the tough language, the tough rhetoric, back and forth about whether we're going to be tough. Has this proven effective? I mean, how do you see it?
Picky, picky, picky. You just want to find fault. Of course it hasn't, Judy. It's been a failure. I mean, he had no honeymoon. This was a shorter honeymoon than Liza Minnelli's. I mean, this thing was over. I mean, in 24 hours, and he ended it. I mean, he now think about this. I mean, how inept this president has been. His popular act was a proportional, in most people's judgment, response to the outrage and international offense of the Syrian government poisoning gas on its own people, all right? And a plurality of Americans, in spite of the economic news you presented earlier this evening, see the economy getting better. And with those things going for him, his own favorable rating fell in the polls. I mean, so, no, I mean, there's total dissatisfaction with him. He's going to be typhoid Mary politically heading into 2018 on this path.
But David, you're saying that he's learned something, that he's grown in office.
Yeah, no, I think
So,
both.
are
both
we-
are true.
are we
Listen, his
talking
first
about the
100 days
same-
are not a success. This is not FDR we're talking about here. It's a failure. But I'm looking for opportunities for growth. It's like when you have a student who gets an F, you think, oh, you got a D minus. This is so much better. And so I'm looking on the bright side. And if you go from dangerous to fickle, I think that's a good move. And then the final thing I'll say, I'm really struck by Bob Costa, our colleague from Washington Week, did a great with Ashley Parker, a great piece on his television watching habits. And he had this interview with AP where he talks about how hard it was to rip himself away from the habit of watching every single TV show about himself. And so you see a guy sort of transparently and naively struggling with maybe narcissism, but certainly the TV obsession. And the lack of attention span is what causes all this fickleness. Whoever saw him last gets the policy for the day. And will that settle down, or will we just sort of get a weather vane for the next 4 years? I don't know, but I do think that the first 30 days was unsustainable. He was crashing every hour, and that's calmed down a little.
I stand in awe of David's optimism. I really do.
Fickle better than dangerous.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah. But Judy, 2 things that have occurred of Donald Trump, and Donald Trump deserves credit for. For the first time since it passed in 2010, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, is now more popular than it's ever been before. Majority of Americans, it's more popular than Donald Trump. if you want to do it just in a comparative. And the other thing is that Americans who had been on a Tea Party tear, the smaller government, now want government, according to the Wall Street Journal NBC poll, to do more. They want it more to do more in their lives and to be more active. So this just goes completely antithetical to the Republican ideology of a smaller, leaner, cheaper government withdrawing. And so, I think there's great change in the air. I don't know where it comes down, but it's hard for me to see that there's any hand on the rudder of the ship of state.
But his supporters, and we keep seeing this in the polls, and the reporters who are going around the country talking to people that voted for Donald Trump, David, they still like what he's doing.
Yeah, no, they do. People are solid. People are mostly driven by partisanship. They're the prism through which they see reality is their partisan identity. And so that'll take a lot to shake off. I do think it can be shaken off. It seems very, very likely to me this tax reform is not going to go anywhere, at least anything like its current form. And so how does he react to that? At what point does the economy take a dip and maybe people say, hey, what exactly are you doing for me now? But I do think that'll be a while. Partisan identity right now is so strong that if you ask people, how's the economy doing, it doesn't matter how the economy is doing. It's whether their guy's in power is how they see it. So that loyalty will stay there for a little while.
Just one thing, Judy, and before Democrats start popping the champagne, 67% of Americans feel Democrats, the Democratic Party, is out of touch with what's going on in their lives, more than a lot more than they feel that about Donald Trump. So if anything, yes, 96 to 98% of the people who voted for him are with him and would do so again. But I mean, the Democrats have to be a lot more than just we're not Trump. I mean, that is not the answer to their problems.
It's not yet the makings of a comeback.
No.
Mark Shields, David Brooks, we hope both of you come back. Thank you.
Wow.